Something you don't see every day, President Trump getting an unplanned and unvarnished view of how impeachment is actually playing out among some members of the public. It didn't go well. Watch right here. Donald Trump steps outside of his White House bubble and goes to Game 5 of the World Series in Washington on Sunday, only to see an enormous Impeach Trump banner hanging in the outfield. Behind home plate, Veterans for Impeachment signs. And then there was this loud boos following the announcement of Trump and the First Lady's attendance.
We are joined by the President and First Lady of the United States.
As you can hear, that went on and on. The crowd also followed up with some chants of, quote, lock him up, ringing through the stadium. Now, that's the reaction of some members of the public. Meanwhile, there are many anonymous worried Republicans who appear to be sending up flares. One Republican senator saying that the problematic public arguments from Donald Trump combined with a series of evidentiary bombshells makes it all feel like a horror movie. Here to discuss is Jason Johnson, politics editor for TheRoot.com. Good evening to you, sir. How do you think it's all playing there in Washington in the crowds and how that affects these senators who could ultimately be, under the impeachment system, Donald Trump's jurors?
Well, it's not just Donald Trump who heard those boos, Ari. It's all the Republican senators, right? And yes, Washington, D.C. is a bit of a blue place. But, you know, all these red hats were not MAGA hats. It was regular people, moderates and conservatives, who were screaming and yelling and booing. And I think this is important to understand. A lot of times presidents are in these sort of varnished environments. They're in meetings. They're in colleges where only a couple of students are able to speak to them. And they get an impression about how the public feels about them that's not true. This was an opportunity for the president to see the country, at least in this particular place, is not behind you. People are upset with you. And the very same game that he threw at Hillary Clinton of lock her up is now being thrown back at her.
Yeah, and I think we on this show have criticized and reported on the problems with a kind of a circular, politicized notion of lock them up, whoever they may be, if it isn't pursuant to the justice system. Having said that, of course, the politics of it are pretty obvious, as you say. It suggests a real heat and energy. And it's not just people who are in the so-called resistance to the Democratic Party. Steve Bannon has widely been seen as an advocate of Donald Trump. He was literally the number one person on the 2016 campaign when they won. He closed out as chairman into November. Here's what he had to say about who he thinks is winning this debate right now. Take a listen.
I said, you got to wake up to this process that Nancy Pelosi's running. She's running the most sophisticated political warfare, and they're winning right now. She has the votes. As sure as the turning of the earth, in a couple of weeks, Nancy Pelosi is going to bring two charges in front of the House, and they will vote to impeach Trump and pass it to the Senate.
Jason?
Yeah, Steve Bannon's a smart guy. And here's the other thing, Ari. When you mentioned before, Republicans are complaining, oh, my gosh, this is a horror movie. What is it us? Are you tethered? You don't have to be tethered to the president. Republicans have the ability to get themselves out of the horror movie. Even though the call is coming from inside the House, the Senate still has some power here. And the problem is you have too many Republicans who have to have a screaming crowd at a baseball game that the Nationals lost before they realize that staking out an independent path might be a better decision for them. Steve Bannon has always been somebody who's very good at acknowledging strategy. Nancy Pelosi knows where she's going with this. The vote later on this week is going to lay out ironclad rules so Republicans can't claim that they don't know the process anymore. I think now is a time, whether you decide that you're going to support President Trump or not, as a Republican, you need to have a clear reason, and not just one that works on the talk shows, one that you're going to be able to explain back in your district at home.
Yeah, and that's the final question I want to ask you. I'm speaking to you on a week that is kicking off with the House and Speaker Pelosi setting the agenda. The president is responding to the evidence they've unearthed, to the schedule they're setting, to a Thursday vote. As mentioned, that's new and big, and nobody knew 2 months ago that this week the House would be doing that. This is Speaker Pelosi driving it. And I wonder what you think about how Donald Trump has struggled to handle her, which really builds out of your answer to the last question, as in contrast to Mr. Mueller, who ran by as he was supposed to, didn't run a political game, didn't run a public game, but in that private, confidential, and very careful process, Mr. Mueller in the public eye was obviously sometimes overwhelmed by other louder forces, be they Mr. Barr or Mr. Trump. And yet here, Donald Trump looks, in a public fight over evidence, he looks outmaneuvered this week by the speaker.
Well, because Robert Mueller was concerned with what he constrained himself with, right? Robert Mueller said, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to stop leaks. So he was never able to fight the PR battle that many Democrats and sort of resistance people wanted to. Nancy Pelosi knows the PR battle. Nancy Pelosi knew how to set up the 220 Democrats. Think about this also, Ari. 24 hours ago, the president was crowing about the fact that he defeated ISIS. We're not talking about that anymore. By Thursday, we're going to be talking about the pre-impeachment vote. Politically and communications-wise, Nancy Pelosi is for once running circles around him. And the problem is, if the president can't figure out a way to change this narrative, not only is he obviously probably going to lose the impeachment vote in the House, but he will lose support in the Senate. And the real question is not going to be whether or not he gets removed. I don't think that happens. But if this continues to go bad from a messaging standpoint, you could see 5, 6, 7, 8 senators, Republican senators, make symbolic votes for impeachment because the president can't explain himself and they're tired of taking arrows for him.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're right or not, but I do know that the reporting does suggest that what you're saying is quite plausible, because Republican senators aren't just saying now, let's sit through a few bad weeks and move on.
Right.
They're throwing up these warnings, these blind quotes. They're trying, maybe some would argue in a very secretive way because they don't want to put their name on it, but they're not saying, hey, a Republican somewhere said we're losing. It says Republican senator. And if you are the president facing impeachment, senator in your party is the most important person in the world until you know you're not convicted. We know that from history. Jason, always good to chop it up with you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.